Swords would suck in a zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
Or at least that's what we used to think. I think that a sword would be a perfectly good choice in a zombie apocalypse.
No, not the overcorrection. On the off chance that you're not aware of the Cell Sword Arts channel, go check it out, link down below. David and Clark do great work over there, and I generally agree with most of what they're saying, except this time. Okay, so would swords suck in a zombie apocalypse? It depends. No, actually, yeah, kind of. We do need some more nuance, though. And of course, the shorts format does not lend itself to nuance whatsoever. But this is something that I'd like to elaborate on a little bit, nerd out about. It does depend on the type of sword, of course. These two could hardly be more different. And against zombies, you definitely want a Kriegsmesser rather than a side sword. This beast here would undoubtedly be quite effective for lopping off zombie heads and limbs and splitting skulls and all of that. For a while at least. Swords can do a lot of damage, no doubt about it. There's even the classic archaeological example of a sword turning a skull into a drinking bowl, basically. When you look at historical manuscripts on fighting with swords, there are plenty of attacks to the head, even with rapiers. But a duel, of course, is very different than fighting a horde of the undead, where you have to destroy the brain. And thrusts are not something I would want to use in that case. At least with swords. Why? Because if you have a fairly thin, long, flexible blade and it goes into a head, it may not come out as easily. That's the highest likelihood of getting stuck, in my opinion. Because unless you have robot-like precision and go in at the exact same angle and out again, then yeah, it's not going to get stuck. But there's a very high chance that the angle at which you go in with a thrust is going to be different from the angle at which you're pulling out. At which point the blade flexes and might get stuck in the bone, which is, of course, the last thing you want. The flexing in the target can also become a problem with a sword cut, because if the edge alignment is a little bit off and it starts to twist in the target when it comes to bone, that can be quite bad for the blade. That's how you get damage. It's the same problem with tree limbs and whatnot. It's not in and of itself abuse or bad to cut into tree limbs, particularly if they're still relatively fresh or if it's not the hardest wood, etc. That in and of itself is not the problem. The problem becomes when you throw off the edge alignment a little bit and then it gets stuck in the wood and twists, and you've got all that energy going into bending the blade. That's how you can get severe edge damage. And the cut wouldn't be as effective, of course. But the main problem I see is really the potential for damage. You may have seen the tests I've done with this katana. The blade is softer than I was anticipating, and is a pretty significant set. And it's not a simple bend that you could straighten out fairly easily. The problem is this is kind of a meandering twist where it goes off to the right and then back over to the left. And the more complex the bend is, the harder it is to fix. And of course, even if you straighten it out, now it's already somewhat weakened. The more often you bend it to straighten it out again, the more you weaken the blade at that point. And this kind of thing can really make cuts much less effective, because it's harder to align properly, obviously, because the edge is twisted. And worse, if you severely underestimate the hardness of the steel, the results can be catastrophic. I had a very regrettable case of that quite a few years ago, and you can't repair that. If there is a chip in the blade, you can grind it out, but every time you do, you have to remove quite a bit of width from the blade. I mean, you can't just grind out that particular area. In this hopefully fictional apocalypse scenario, that's really all you would want to do. You wouldn't want to reprofile the entire blade every time. That's the proper way to do it, to make everything nice and even, but you would just be sacrificing too much material. So you would really only want to grind out those particular damaged areas. And the deeper the nick or gouge is, the more material you have to remove. As the damage accumulates, the risk of the blade straight up breaking increases. And what do you do then? Generally, repairs are going to be challenging. That's why I said before that a katana would not be great in a zombie apocalypse. Sure, the edge is quite hard generally, so you're less likely to receive damage. But again, we're talking about a hard target. We're talking about cutting into bone. So if the edge alignment is not ideal, again, the likelihood of that happening increases. And think about it. In a zombie apocalypse where you have to dispatch a lot of them, you're going to get tired. And the more tired you get, the sloppier your edge alignment is going to be. So it's pretty high risk of damage. With a katana, even regular resharpening is much more of a task, at least if you want to do it properly, because then you have to polish the entire blade by hand, which takes a long time. And a set of high quality whetstones which you may not be able to lug around and which are a consumable resource difficult to replace in the apocalypse. Again, it depends on the type, blade profile, edge grind, etc. Something like this is borderline indestructible, but even then, you may be able to see there is some edge damage, even on this. In that case, it's not as big of a deal because this is a chunky blade. Right? So even if this were dull or entirely blunt, you could still crack a head with that, no problem. Especially if they're kind of softer due to decay, depends on how the zombies work. But anyway, the downside, of course, is it's much heavier than a historical blade would be. In fact, I wouldn't even consider this a sword. You know, it's a cleaver, or chopper, whatever the hell. Yeah, it's quite a short blade. Honestly, I would not be very happy with that in a zombie apocalypse. If you choke down, yeah, you have more reach, but then it's even more unwieldy. So there's some downsides, but here's the other thing. This can be used as a tool, and that is something that you don't have with a sword at all. So this can absolutely chop firewood. It's also good for clearing underbrush and whatnot. For that reason, I think generally machetes are better than swords in a zombie apocalypse, even though they still have the downside of, you know, higher risk of getting stuck and higher risk of edge damage, etc. This, on the other hand, doesn't have these problems. And this is also a really good compromise, in my opinion, between durability and damage. Obviously, an axe is made for chopping into hard targets. And the nice thing here is that while the edge is pretty acute, it's not as narrow of an angle as swords usually are. So it's a little more durable in that regard. But as you can see, it's still not a chunky axe blade. So the head is fairly light, but has a really good taper. It's also quite a hard edge. Again, it's designed for chopping into hard material. If it can withstand wood chopping repeatedly, then yeah, it can deal with a zombie head or two, or hundreds, right? Now, in this case, of course, the problem is the haft can break. That's always the downside of axes. But if it does, you can repair it much more easily than a sword. You can't reforge a broken sword, unlike what fantasy movies and whatnot are trying to tell you. It just doesn't work that way. This, on the other hand, yeah, you can carve a new handle. I mean, it can in an apocalypse situation. It's more of a challenge. You would ideally carry multiple replacement handles because you can't just go out in the woods and just get some random branch or whatever and carve it. It needs to be seasoned hardwood. Not everything will work. Also, depending on how the haft breaks, you might be able to put it back together. In this case, I used wood glue and wrapped it in duct tape to repurpose for a different video. Try that with a sword blade. And by that I mean don't. Replacing an axe haft is a heck of a lot easier than a sword blade, or even just repairing extensive damage to the blade. Also, if the handle is well made, it'll last a long time. I got this axe here back in 2014, I believe. If not 2013. Either way, it's over 10 years old, and this is the original haft. Not that I'm a professional lumberjack or anything, but I have used it quite a bit over the years, and this is still the original haft. Now, in this case, it's a bit small. I would definitely like a much longer haft for fighting zombies, but it's going to take much, much less effort. Like, to try to achieve the same kind of damage with a sword than with an axe, it's like 3 times more effort. Don't quote me on that, it's not a scientific number, but it is so much. Basically with this you can just do that and it'll go into the cranial cavity. It's much, much easier. And you can also use the other side, which is quite useful because when we look at that video, David is covered in blood. Depending on how the zombie infection works, you might not want zombie goop on you. Even if it doesn't work that way, even if you don't catch the zombie bug that way, it's not really a good thing to be splattered like that. It could still lead to kind of regular conventional infections, or even just hygiene is a bit of a concern when you don't have access to a shower every day and whatnot. So yeah, you might want to use something blunt instead. A flanged mace would work great on zombies, but of course then you again have the disadvantage that it's only a weapon. It doesn't have tool use as well. I mean, breaching, I suppose, but otherwise there are not too many things you can do with it. And that matters. You know, real life is not a video game. Well, I say real life while talking about a zombie apocalypse. More realistic fictional scenarios, shall we say, you don't have an invisible inventory. It's just like a pocket dimension or something where you just do this and it disappears and then you have it in your inventory. No, you have to actually carry this crap. So you can't really be carrying like 3 weapons and 5 tools and all the supplies you need, like your tent and sleeping bag and first aid kit and medication and food and water. So in my opinion, obviously any weapon is better than none. And a sword in and of itself is a great weapon. It's pretty versatile. As far as fighting goes, as said, completely useless as a tool, but it can do a lot of damage. It's quick, it conserves energy. You can swing it for much longer without getting tired compared to, most axes and hammers and maces and whatnot. But overall, I do think an axe, especially one with a spike, or a hammer with a spike, in fact, that might actually be the best option. Hammer on one side, spike on the other, because that way you have the blunt impact that still does a lot of damage to a rotting skull, especially. And the spike, I mean, I've talked about it before. This thing is so overpowered, it needs to be nerfed. You may say, hang on, a spike? Can't that get stuck even more? I don't think so. In the tests I've done, it really only got stuck really badly on a helmet, which is a different story. If a zombie's wearing that, well, again, flip it around, use the hammer side. There you go, right? But in an actual skull, if it gets stuck momentarily, you just do the old can opener. Even when you get stuck in solid wood, that's what gets it out, right? And we're talking a hollow bone spherical-ish object, right? So this absolutely is going to come right out, going to break the bone and free it quite easily. So guys, in my opinion, your original statement was perfectly good. In a zombie apocalypse, swords would kind of suck for the most part. Again, it depends on the type. Rapiers and small swords would be absolutely awful. A messer or falchion would be decent, pretty good, but there are better options by far. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this nerdy rant. Thanks for watching and take care. Don't get bit. David and Clark do great work over there, and it helps that in addition to their experience, they're actually physically fit, which for practical tests and martial arts demonstrations and whatnot is definitely preferable over being a chronically ill, decaying husk in constant pain. Cynicism is not a great coping mechanism, but at some point there's just not much left to go on. Anyway,